In the heart of New York City, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and streets buzzed with life, there lived a young girl who had everything money could buy. She grew up in a world most people only dreamed of: luxury cars parked outside her home, closets filled with designer clothes, private tutors teaching her things she didn't even know she needed to learn. Her father was one of the richest men in the city, owning buildings that towered over others like giants among ants. But all this wealth came at a price. The girl never really got to play outside like other kids her age. Instead of running barefoot through parks or climbing trees, she spent hours practicing piano, learning etiquette, and attending fancy parties where adults spoke about deals and investments she didn't understand. Life seemed perfect on the surface, but deep down something felt missing. A sense of freedom, maybe, or just being able to live like any normal kid. Then, when she turned 16, everything changed overnight. It started as an ordinary day. Nothing unusual stood out. She was heading home from school in the family car, laughing with friends about silly jokes they shared during class. Suddenly, tires screeched, metal crunched, and glass shattered. A truck driver hadn't seen the red light, and within seconds their car spun uncontrollably before slamming into a pole. When she woke up in the hospital days later, surrounded by machines beeping and nurses rushing around, reality hit hard. Doctors explained what happened gently, trying not to scare her further. But no matter how softly they spoke, the truth couldn't be softened. It was final. An injury to her spine meant she wouldn't walk again. Just like that, her legs stopped working. No amount of money could fix it, they said. No surgery could reverse the damage done. Her once bright future now felt dim. Days turned into weeks, then months, and soon, the wheelchair became part of her identity. Friends stopped visiting because they didn't know what to say. Family tried their best, but pity hung heavy in the air whenever someone looked at her. Even her father, who usually solved problems with his checkbook, seemed helpless. For the first time in her life, she realized money couldn't solve everything. One evening, sitting alone by the window of her penthouse apartment, she stared out at the glittering lights of the city below. Cars honked, people hurried past, and somewhere far away, laughter echoed faintly. Watching the world move without her made her feel invisible, forgotten. That's when she noticed him, a boy standing near the entrance of their building. He looked dirty, his clothes torn, hair messy, but his eyes, those eyes held something different. They weren't judging or pitying her. They were sharp, intense, almost like he knew something she didn't. Curiosity tugged at her. Who was this boy? Why was he staring at her window? Most importantly, why did his gaze make her feel uneasy yet intrigued at the same time? She wanted to ignore him, pretend he wasn't there, but something kept pulling her attention back to him. Maybe it was the way he stood so still amidst the chaos of the busy street. Or perhaps it was the look in his eyes, a mix of determination and sadness she couldn't quite place. The next night he appeared again, this time holding a small wooden box. This wasn't some random passerby anymore. There was purpose in his movements, intention in the way he glanced toward her window. Against her better judgment, and despite warnings from her caretaker, she decided to let him inside. If nothing else, she figured, talking to someone new might break the monotony of her days. As the elevator doors opened and he stepped into her luxurious living room, she felt a strange contrast between his scruffy appearance and the polished surroundings. He introduced himself shyly, saying his name and explaining that he had something important for her. Then, without hesitation, he handed her the box. It was old, worn, with scratches marking its surface, but it carried weight. Both, literally and figuratively. "What's this?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "Something you need," he replied cryptically, avoiding direct eye contact. His words sent chills down her spine. Need? What could she possibly need from a stranger like him? Opening the box revealed an ancient-looking journal. Its cover bore faded handwriting and a peculiar symbol carved into the leather. Flipping through its pages, she saw entries written decades ago by someone named Clara. Each page detailed experiments, breakthroughs, and struggles related to spinal injuries. One phrase caught her attention. Mobility restored. Her heart raced. Could this journal hold answers? Was it possible that after years of despair, hope lay hidden in these yellowed pages? Looking up at the boy, she demanded answers. How did he find this? And why give it to her? He hesitated before speaking. Clara. She knew your dad. He muttered, then quickly added, I'll explain more later, before slipping out the door as silently as he'd come. Left alone with the journal, she sat there stunned. Who was Clara? What connection did she have to her father? And why would anyone keep such groundbreaking research hidden? Questions swirled in her mind, each one fueling a fire inside her, a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since the accident, she felt alive. Whatever secrets lay buried in the past, she was determined to uncover them. Little did she know, this mysterious boy in the journal marked the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. The next morning, the girl couldn't stop thinking about the boy and the strange journal. She had barely slept, her mind racing with questions. Who was Clara? What did she know about her father? And why would someone leave such a thing in the hands of a street kid? The more she thought about it, the more confused she felt, but also curious. Something about the whole situation tugged at her, like a loose thread begging to be pulled. She decided to show the journal to her father. He was sitting in his study, as usual, surrounded by papers and files, his face buried in work. When she knocked on the door, he looked up, surprised. It wasn't often that she came to him like this, especially not lately. Their relationship had grown distant since the accident. He tried to help, but most of the time, he just seemed lost, unsure of what to do or say. Dad? She began hesitantly, holding out the journal. I need you to tell me something. Her father took the book from her hands, frowning as he examined it. His expression changed almost instantly. His eyes widened slightly, and his jaw tightened. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, with a deep sigh, he gestured for her to sit down. Where did you get this? He asked, his voice low and serious. There's a boy. He brought it to me last night, she explained. He said Clara knew you. Her father leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples like he was trying to erase a headache. There was a long pause before he finally spoke. Clara was someone I used to work with, a long time ago. What kind of work? She pressed, leaning forward eagerly. This was the first time her father had ever mentioned anything about his past, beyond business deals and real estate projects. We were scientists, he admitted slowly. Not the kind who wear lab coats and mix chemicals, though. We worked on medical research, specifically treatments for spinal injuries. Her heart skipped a beat. Spinal injuries, like hers. She stared at him, waiting for him to continue. Clara was brilliant, he went on, his voice softening. She had this idea, a way to repair damaged nerves using experimental techniques no one else had thought of. We made progress, real progress, but then... His voice trailed off and he shook his head. But then what? She urged, desperate to hear the rest. There was a fire, he said quietly. The lab burned down. Clara disappeared after that. No one knows what happened to her. Everyone assumed she died in the flames. The room fell silent. Her father looked older somehow, weighed down by memories he'd kept buried for years. But the girl wasn't ready to let it go. If you made progress, why didn't you keep going? Why didn't anyone finish what she started? Her father sighed again, looking away. It wasn't that simple. After the fire, the funding dried up. People got scared. And honestly, he hesitated, guilt flashing across his face. I gave up. I told myself it was impossible. So I moved on, built my company, focused on making money instead of saving lives. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. All those years, all that pain, and her own father had been part of something that could have helped her. But he'd walked away. Anger bubbled inside her, but she pushed it aside. Now wasn't the time for blame, she needed answers. What about the boy? she asked. Why would he bring this to me? How does he even know about Clara? Her father shrugged, clearly as clueless as she was. I don't know, but if he says Clara trusted him with this, maybe we should listen. Later that evening, the boy showed up again, just like before. He appeared near the entrance of their building, staring up at her window as if he knew she'd be watching. This time, though, she didn't hesitate. She called down to the lobby and told the security guard to let him come up. When he stepped into the apartment, he looked nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. She studied him closely. His worn-out shoes, the dirt smudged on his cheeks, the way his hands trembled slightly as he clutched the strap of a backpack slung over his shoulder. Despite his rough appearance, there was something about him that felt genuine, like he carried secrets too heavy for someone his age. You said Clara knew my dad, she said, cutting straight to the point. How? The boy glanced at the floor, then back at her. She was my grandmother, he admitted softly. Before she vanished, she left me instructions. She told me to protect the journal until the right person came along, someone who needed it. The girl blinked, stunned. You mean me? He nodded. Yeah, you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Finally, she broke the silence. Tell me everything you know? And so he did. He told her how Clara had always talked about her research, how passionate she was about helping people walk again. He described how she'd hidden the journal after the fire, entrusting it to him when she realized she might not survive. He spoke of living on the streets, carrying the journal everywhere he went, waiting for the day when it would matter. As he talked, the girl found herself drawn to him. Despite their vastly different lives, they shared something profound, a connection to Clara and her unfinished mission. By the time he finished speaking, tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. Not just because of what he'd endured, but because of the hope his story ignited within her. I want to find out what happened to her, she said firmly, and I want to see if her research can still work. For me, for others. The boy hesitated, glancing toward the door. It won't be easy. People don't want this kind of thing getting out. They'll try to stop us. Then we'll have to be careful, she replied, surprising even herself with her determination. But I'm not giving up. Not this time. He smiled faintly, a spark of admiration in his eyes. All right, he said. We'll figure it out together. From that moment on, an unspoken bond formed between them. Two strangers, brought together by fate and a shared purpose. As they pored over the journal late into the night, deciphering its faded handwriting and cryptic notes, the girl felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. They were just getting started. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries. Every morning, the girl woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since the accident, her mind wasn't clouded by despair, but filled with questions that needed answers. The journal became her constant companion, its pages dog-eared and marked with sticky notes as she tried to piece together Clara's work. But the more she read, the clearer it became. This wasn't something she could do alone. The boy, who had quickly become her unlikely ally, spent hours helping her decode the entries. Together, they sat at the dining table in her penthouse apartment, surrounded by piles of papers, notebooks, and printed maps. He didn't have much formal education, but he had street smarts and an uncanny ability to connect dots others might miss. His insights often surprised her, making her realize how much she underestimated him when they first met. One evening, as they pored over a particularly cryptic section of the journal, the boy suddenly pointed to a phrase scribbled in the margins. Lab 12, final phase. What's Lab 12? He asked, his brow furrowed. She flipped through earlier pages, searching for clues. I think it's where Clara did most of her experiments. There's mention of it here and here. She tapped on two separate entries, excitement bubbling inside her. If we can find this place, maybe we'll uncover what happened to her and finish what she started. But finding Lab 12 wouldn't be easy. The journal only hinted at its location, describing it as being hidden among the hills and far from prying eyes. It sounded like something out of a movie, a secret lab buried deep in the countryside. Still, they decided to take the risk. What choice did they have? The journey itself turned out to be harder than either of them expected. Leaving the city meant stepping far outside her comfort zone. She hadn't traveled anywhere without assistance since the accident, let alone ventured into unfamiliar territory. The thought of navigating uneven roads, climbing steep paths, or dealing with unpredictable weather terrified her. But there was no turning back now, not after everything they'd uncovered. They set off early one morning, packing essentials into a rented van. Her father had reluctantly agreed to fund the trip, though he warned them repeatedly about the dangers. "You're chasing ghosts," he muttered under his breath before handing over a stack of cash. "Just be careful." As they drove out of the city, the towering skyscrapers gave way to rolling hills and open fields. The air smelled fresher, cleaner, and for a brief moment she felt a flicker of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. Beside her, the boy navigated using an old map he'd found tucked inside the journal. They followed winding roads, passing sleepy towns and abandoned buildings until finally they reached the coordinates marked in the journal. What they found took their breath away, or rather, what remained of it. Lab 12 was little more than ruins now, its walls blackened by fire and overtaken by vines. Nature had reclaimed the space, swallowing evidence of human activity whole. Stepping out of the van, she felt a chill run down her spine. This was where Clara's story ended, or so everyone thought. Inside, the destruction was even worse. Brownie, glass crunched underfoot and charred beams hung precariously from the ceiling. Yet amidst the chaos, remnants of Clara's brilliance still lingered. Scattered across the floor were fragments of equipment, melted wires, and singed documents. The boy knelt beside a desk, brushing away dust to reveal a half-burnt notebook. Its pages were brittle, but some words were still legible. "This is it," he whispered, holding it up for her to see. "This has to be part of her final notes." Her hands trembled as she took the notebook from him. Flipping through the fragile pages, she spotted diagrams of neural pathways, formulas written in shorthand, and detailed instructions for a procedure unlike anything she'd ever seen. One entry stood out in particular: implant prototype successful in restoring partial mobility. Next step, human trials. Her heart raced. Human trials. That meant Clara had been close, so close, to achieving her dream. But why had no one continued her work? Why had all of this been left to rot? As they explored further, they stumbled upon something even more shocking: a recording device buried beneath debris. Carefully, the boy pried it loose and pressed play. A woman's voice crackled to life, weak but determined. It was Clara. "If you're hearing this," she began, "then I've failed to protect my research. Powerful forces are working against us, people who don't want these discoveries to reach the public. My partner betrayed me, selling our work to the highest bidder. If I don't make it out of here alive, promise me you'll carry the torch. Finish what I started." The message cut off abruptly, leaving silence in its wake. The girl stared at the device, her chest tight with emotion. Betrayal, corruption, greed. These weren't just words. They were real, tangible forces that had destroyed lives, including Clara's. And now, decades later, they were standing in the ruins of her dreams. Back at the van, they sat quietly, processing everything they'd learned. The boy broke the silence first. "We need to figure out who those people are, the ones who stopped her." She nodded, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "And we need proof. Something solid enough to expose them." But as determined as they were, danger loomed closer than they realized. Unknown to them, someone had been watching their every move. A shadowy figure lurked nearby, snapping photos of the van and jotting down license plate numbers. Whoever these enemies were, they weren't about to let two kids dig up secrets long buried. That night, as they drove back toward the city, the girl couldn't shake the feeling they were being followed. Every glance in the rearview mirror made her stomach churn. Still, she refused to let fear stop her. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: they were on to something big. And if they played their cards right, they might just change the world. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Not because of wealth or privilege, but because of hope. Hope that someday, somehow, she'd walk again and help others do the same. The city skyline greeted them as they returned from their trip to the ruins of Lab 12, but the familiar sight offered little comfort. The girl couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching them. Every time the van slowed, at a red light or stopped in traffic, she glanced nervously into the rearview mirror. Shadows seemed darker, faces sharper, and every passerby felt like a potential threat. The boy noticed her unease and tried to reassure her. "We'll be fine," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Just stay alert." She nodded, forcing herself to focus on the road ahead. But deep down she knew they were treading dangerous waters. Clara's research wasn't just groundbreaking, it was explosive. If powerful people had gone to such lengths to bury it once, what would they do now that someone was trying to dig it up? When they got back to her apartment, they spread out everything they'd collected on the dining table: the charred notebook, fragments of equipment salvaged from the lab, and photos they'd taken of diagrams etched onto scorched walls. Each piece of evidence told part of Clara's story, but piecing it all together was like solving a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. They worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and determination, until exhaustion finally forced them to stop. The next morning, things took a turn for the worse. Her father called early, his voice tense and hurried. "You need to stop this," he said without preamble. "It's not safe." "What are you talking about?" she asked, sitting upright in bed. "Someone contacted me last night," he replied. "They know you've been poking around. They warned me to keep you away from this, whatever it is." Her stomach sank. "Who contacted you?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But they sounded serious. Please listen to me. Let this go." For a moment, anger flared inside her. How could he expect her to give up now? After everything they'd uncovered, after coming so close to uncovering the truth. She clenched her fists, biting back a sharp retort. Yelling wouldn't solve anything. Instead, she promised him she'd think about it, a lie meant to buy her time. Later that day, when the boy arrived, she filled him in on the call. He listened, silently, his expression grim. "This changes things," he said finally. "If they're threatening your dad, it means they're getting desperate, and desperate people do stupid stuff." "So what do we do?" she asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "We double down," he replied firmly. "We find proof, something undeniable. Then we take it public before they can stop us." Easier said than done. With limited resources and no idea who their enemies were, exposing the conspiracy seemed impossible, but neither of them was ready to quit. They decided to reach out to someone who might help, an investigative journalist named Mia, known for her fearless reporting on corporate scandals. Mia agreed to meet them at a quiet cafe downtown. When they arrived, she was already seated, sipping tea and scrolling through her phone. She looked unassuming, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that hinted at her tenacity. "You two have guts," she said after hearing their story. "But guts alone won't protect you. This kind of thing gets people hurt." "We're not backing down," the girl insisted. "Clara gave her life for this. We owe it to her to finish what she started." Mia studied her for a long moment, before nodding. "All right, here's what we'll do. First, I'll dig into the companies tied to your father's rivals, the ones who stood to gain from suppressing Clara's work. Second, I'll look into the fire at Lab 12. There might be records or witnesses we can track down." Relief washed over them both. For the first time, they felt like they weren't completely alone in this fight. Over the next few weeks, progress came in fits and starts. Mia unearthed connections between major pharmaceutical companies and shadowy figures linked to Clara's betrayal. Meanwhile, the girl and the boy combed through old newspapers and archives, searching for anyone who might have survived the fire. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly one afternoon, when they stumbled upon an interview with a former lab technician. The man, now elderly, lived in a small town hours away. They drove out to see him, braving winding roads and pouring rain. When they arrived, he greeted them warily, reluctant to talk. But once they showed him the journal and explained why they were there, his resistance melted. "I thought everyone forgot about her," he said softly, tears welling in his eyes. Clara was special. She believed science should serve humanity, not profit margins. That's why they turned on her. He went on to describe how Clara's partner, one of the co-founders of the research project, had sold their findings to a rival company. In exchange for money and influence, he sabotaged the lab, ensuring Clara's work would never see the light of day. The fire, he revealed, hadn't been an accident. It was arson. Armed with this new information, they raced back to the city, eager to share it with Mia. But danger struck sooner than expected. One night, while walking home from the library, the boy was ambushed. A group of men cornered him in a dark alley, demanding answers. Though badly beaten, he managed to escape, limping back to the girl's apartment just before dawn. Seeing him bruised and bloodied sent waves of panic through her. "We need to stop," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I can't lose you too." "No," he said hoarsely, gripping her hand. "We're so close, don't let them win." His words reignited her resolve. Together they vowed to finish what Clara had started, no matter the cost. With Mia's help, they compiled all the evidence they'd gathered and prepared to release it to the world. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was their determination. As they uploaded the files online, sending ripples of truth across the internet, they knew their lives would never be the same again. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The moment the files went live online, the world seemed to hold its breath. It was late at night when they hit upload, but within minutes, notifications began flooding in. Likes, shares, comments, and messages from people who couldn't believe what they were reading. The evidence spread like wildfire, jumping from social media platforms to news outlets faster than anyone could have predicted. By morning, it was everywhere. But with the spotlight came danger. Powerful forces didn't take kindly to having their secrets exposed, especially not ones tied to corruption and greed. Almost immediately, the backlash began. Her father received another call, this time angrier and more threatening. "You've made a mistake," the voice growled. "Fix it, or there will be consequences." Her dad sounded shaken when he relayed the message to her. "I told you this would happen," he said, pacing the floor of his study. "They'll come after us. All of us." She wanted to reassure him, to tell him everything would be okay, but she couldn't lie. Fear gnawed at her too. She'd seen how far these people were willing to go. They'd burned down a lab, silenced Clara, and now they'd hurt the boy just for standing in their way. Still, she refused to back down, not after coming so close to uncovering the truth. That afternoon, the boy vanished. One minute, he was sitting in the living room scrolling through updates on his phone. The next, he was gone without a word. At first, she thought maybe he'd stepped out for fresh air or grabbed something to eat. But as hours passed and he didn't return, panic set in. She called his number repeatedly, each unanswered ring twisting the knot in her stomach tighter. Finally, around midnight, her phone buzzed. A text message appeared. "Sorry, had to leave. Too dangerous for you. Take care of yourself." Her hands trembled as she stared at the screen. He'd left to protect her. That much was clear. But the thought of him facing whatever danger awaited alone broke her heart. For the first time, since starting this journey, she felt truly powerless. What good was all their hard work if they couldn't even keep each other safe? Determined not to give up, she turned to Mia for help. The journalist had been monitoring the fallout closely, tracking reactions from both the public and those implicated in the scandal. When she heard the boy was missing, her expression hardened. "They're testing us," Mia said grimly. "Trying to scare us into silence. We can't let them win." Together, they devised a plan. They knew the boy wouldn't stay away for long. He cared too much about finishing what Clara started. So instead of waiting for him to resurface, they decided to strike first. Using the evidence they'd gathered, they drafted a detailed report, exposing the conspiracy and sent it directly to major news organizations. If the story became big enough, they reasoned, it might force their enemies to retreat, or at least make them easier to identify. Days passed in a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. The girl barely ate, her mind consumed by worry for the boy and fear of what might happen next. Then one evening there was a knock at the door. Her heart leapt. Could it be him? She rushed to answer, throwing it open only to find a battered but alive boy standing on the other side. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by anger. "Where have you been?" she demanded, pulling him inside. "Do you have any idea how worried I was?" He winced, clearly in pain, but managed a small smile. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I needed to make sure you were safe." "Safe?" she shot back. "How am I supposed to be safe when you disappear? Like that?" Before he could respond, Mia arrived, having been alerted earlier. Seeing the boy's condition, she immediately sprang into action, tending to his injuries while firing off questions about where he'd been and what had happened. "They found me," he admitted quietly. "Followed me to an old warehouse. I barely got away." Mia's jaw tightened. This is getting worse. They're stepping up their game. Despite everything, the boy insisted they press forward. "We're close," he said. "If we stop now, all of this will have been for nothing." His determination inspired her. As scared as she was, she realized he was right. Giving up wasn't an option, not when lives depended on what they were fighting for. With renewed resolve, they dove back into the investigation, piecing together the final bits of the puzzle. Their efforts paid off when Mia uncovered a key piece of information: the identity of the man behind the betrayal. The same partner who had sold out Clara decades ago. Now a wealthy executive at one of the largest pharmaceutical companies, he had spent years covering his tracks and silencing anyone who threatened to expose him. Armed with this knowledge, they prepared to confront him head-on. Through Mia's contacts, they arranged a meeting with a trusted reporter known for taking down corrupt officials. The plan was simple: present all the evidence publicly, forcing authorities to act. But as the day approached, tension mounted. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar face on the street, sent shivers down their spines. Finally, the day arrived. Surrounded by cameras and microphones, they stood side by side as the truth came pouring out. Documents, testimonies, photographs, it all painted a damning picture of greed and deceit. The executive tried to deny it at first, but the weight of the evidence crushed his defenses. Within hours, police raided his office, seizing records and freezing assets. Victory tasted bittersweet. Yes, they'd exposed the conspiracy and honored Clara's legacy, but the cost had been high. Lives had been threatened, trust shattered, and scars, both physical and emotional, would linger for years to come. As the dust settled, the girl looked at the boy, gratitude swelling in her chest. Without him, none of this would have been possible. Together, they had faced unimaginable odds and emerged stronger because of it. Now, with the world watching, she turned her attention inward. Clara's research offered hope, not just for her, but for countless others suffering from similar injuries. Inspired by her courage, she made a decision. She would undergo the experimental procedure outlined in the journal. It was risky, yes, but worth every ounce of uncertainty. For the first time in years, she felt ready to take a leap of faith. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't alone anymore. The decision to undergo the experimental procedure wasn't made lightly. For days, the girl wrestled with doubts and fears. What if it didn't work? What if something went wrong? The journal had outlined Clara's findings in detail, but there were still gaps, things even Mia and the boy couldn't fully piece together. Yet deep down, she knew this was her chance, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd been told they'd never walk again. Preparations began immediately. They reached out to a team of doctors willing to take on the risky surgery, explaining every step of Clara's method as best they could. Some were skeptical at first, hesitant to trust decades-old research conducted under questionable circumstances. But when presented with the evidence, the diagrams, formulas, and testimonies from former lab workers, they agreed to give it a shot. After all, what did they have to lose? The weeks leading up to the surgery were filled with tests, scans, and endless discussions about risks and expectations. Her father hovered anxiously, torn between pride and fear. He hadn't stopped blaming himself for abandoning Clara's work years ago, and now he poured everything into making sure his daughter got the care she deserved. Though their relationship remained complicated, she appreciated his efforts even if she couldn't bring herself to forgive him completely. As for the boy, he stayed by her side through it all, holding her hand during appointments, cracking jokes to lighten the mood, and reminding her why they'd fought so hard to get here. Their bond had grown stronger over the months, forged in fire and tempered by shared struggles. She often caught him staring at her, his eyes filled with a mix of admiration and worry. "You're brave," he said one evening as they sat together in her apartment. "Braver than anyone I know." She smiled faintly, leaning back against the couch. "I'm scared too, you know." "Doesn't matter," he replied softly. "Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave, it means you're human." His words stuck with her, echoing in her mind long after he left that night. The day of the surgery arrived sooner than she expected. As she lay in the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and masked nurses, reality hit hard. This was the moment she'd dreamed of for years. If successful, she might finally stand on her own 2 feet again. But failure loomed like a shadow, whispering doubts in her ear. Before they wheeled her into the operating room, the boy squeezed her hand tightly. "No matter what happens," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes, "you've already changed the world. Remember that." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Then the anesthesia took hold, pulling her into darkness. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time lost all meaning in the haze of recovery. When she woke up, groggy and disoriented, the first thing she noticed was pain. Sharp, searing pain radiating through her lower body. Panic surged inside her. Had something gone wrong? Was this it? The end of hope? But then slowly she realized the pain wasn't bad. It was alive. Her legs felt heavy, foreign almost, like limbs she hadn't used in years, because she hadn't. A nurse stood nearby, smiling warmly. "Welcome back," she said gently. "You're going to be okay." Okay didn't begin to describe it. Over the next few weeks, she worked tirelessly with physical therapists, relearning how to move, balance, and eventually take steps. Each milestone felt monumental: the first twitch of muscle, the first shaky attempt to stand, the first wobbly step forward. Tears streamed down her face the first time she walked unaided, clutching the railing for support as cheers erupted around her. Through it all, the boy never left her side. He celebrated every victory, no matter how small, and reminded her to keep pushing when frustration threatened to overwhelm her. Together, they marked each achievement with quiet moments of reflection, acknowledging how far they'd come since that fateful night outside her building. Months later, life had transformed in ways she never imagined. With the help of Mia and others, she founded a foundation dedicated to advancing spinal injury research, ensuring Clara's legacy lived on. Donations poured in from around the globe, funding new studies and clinical trials based on Clara's methods. Stories of recovery began trickling in, from patients taking their first steps to families finally seeing light at the end of a dark tunnel. Her father, too, found redemption. He threw himself into supporting the foundation, using his wealth and influence to make amends for past mistakes. Their relationship improved slowly, built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than guilt or obligation. As for the boy, he became part of the family, not officially, but in every way that mattered. He moved into the penthouse, trading tattered clothes for fresh ones and street smarts for stability. More importantly, he gained something he'd never had before: belonging. One evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights, She turned to him with a smile. "Do you ever think about where we started?" she asked. "All the time," he replied, grinning. "Never thought I'd end up here." "Me neither," she admitted. "But I wouldn't change a thing." And she meant it. Every challenge, every setback, every moment of fear and triumph had led them to this place, a future brighter than either of them could have imagined. Clara's dream had become their reality, proof that even in the darkest times hope could shine through.